Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. So we talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Roche Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. March Madness is right around the corner, and every single college basketball fan, including myself, cannot wait for the NCAA tournament to begin. But today, I want to take a look at the other tournament, the NIT, the tournament that Joe Stenardi over at the Barking Crow calls his favorite tournament. It used to be the biggest tournament in college basketball back in the day. It was founded in 1938, and a lot of teams pride themselves on their NIT championships. But today, the NIT has declined so far to the point where it is no longer being taken place in Madison Square Garden, and a lot of teams are declining the NIT, and they don't want to play in the tournament at all. I'm going to go over whether teams should decline the NIT or whether the tournament is still worthy enough for these teams to be playing in. Now, I will say for the NIT, we know the decline has been big because if you go and you just look at the history of the tournament when it was founded in 1938, the NCAA tournament did not exist yet. And when teams made the NIT, they wanted to win it. And if you did win the NIT, it was a big deal. And playing in Madison Square Garden, it's one of the best venues in all of sports. And that's what made the intrigue of the NIT so special. But in 1971, when the NCAA decreed that teams had to play in the NCAA tournament and they could not decline the NCAA tournament for the NIT, and the NIT has fallen apart ever since. But the NIT was still doing fairly well until very recently, now that Madison Square Garden is no longer the venue for the NIT. And I get why Madison Square Garden is no longer hosting the NIT, because what's the point? The NIT is a consolation round. Great teams can't play in it. The only teams that do play in the NIT are teams that do not make the NCAA tournament, and they fell short, and they still want to be able to play for something. So the NIT still had some value, but it didn't make sense for Madison Square Garden, such an historic venue, to be hosting an event where it's barely 50% capacity with fans there, because the NIT just isn't that big of a deal. But that's not the only reason that teams are declining the NIT, because you could say teams like Indiana and Duke or North Carolina, if they don't make the NCAA tournament, they don't want to play in the NIT because it's a garbage tournament. It doesn't matter, and we're too good to play in the NIT. And I used to think that was the case, because we saw North Carolina last year. They didn't play in the NIT, and a lot of people thought that North Carolina should have played in the NIT, let the seniors go out with class, and maybe North Carolina could win the tournament and be able to salvage a little bit of their season. But now I'm noticing this year that you see on screen, Indiana has declined a 2024 NIT invite if they got one, which Indiana probably would have, and they're turning their attention to the transfer portal. Chris Beard is saying Ole Miss is going to decline if the NIT comes calling, and Penny Hardaway is also saying that Memphis will decline the NIT. And Memphis and Ole Miss are not blue blood programs. They're not juggernauts like North Carolina and Indiana, who you would think are only declining the NIT because of the fact that they are massive programs and they don't want to be playing in a silly tournament. Indiana actually played in the NIT back in the 2018-2019 season when they had Romeo Langford. And we know that North Carolina played in the NIT back in the 2009-2010 season. So big programs used to play in the NIT. Georgia declined the NIT a few years ago, but they had a lot of turmoil that season. And that was a big reason why a lot of teams decided to decline the NIT, is because maybe their coach was getting fired, or a lot of players just didn't want to play in it. But I do believe that a bigger reason why teams are not playing in the NIT, just besides the fact that the NIT has lost a lot of its prestige, is because of the fact that the transfer portal has made college basketball a completely different sport. The transfer portal window is going to be opening up on Monday. So with these teams like Indiana and Ole Miss and Memphis, who are not going to be playing in the NCAA tournament, they might want to go ahead and get a jump on recruiting the transfer portal before these other teams can really do it, because they're going to be still in the NCAA tournament. And of course, teams aren't going to decline that, because that's your ultimate goal, to win a national title. So I do think for the NIT to possibly be able to get some of these teams to play in the tournament in the future, they're going to have to move the transfer portal window, because I do think a team like Ole Miss would have played in the NIT if that wasn't the case. With Memphis and Penny Hardaway, he said that there's some personal issues going on with him, so maybe that's why Memphis isn't playing, but it makes absolutely no sense for Ole Miss not to play. I did ask on Twitter for Indiana Indiana fans if they thought that they should play in the NIT, and only 37% of people said yes. And I believe if I had asked that question a few years ago, most people would have said that Indiana needed to play in the NIT. So I think overall for the NIT, the tournament's kind of screwed because of the fact that the transfer portal window is making it where it's not advantageous for these teams to play in the NIT because they need to go ahead and get a jump on the transfer portal, because all these teams that are making the NIT, they had bad seasons. So they need to be able to get a leg up on these other teams to possibly get good players in the portal that are already entering from other schools that also struggle, but maybe it's their best player and they want to go to a better school. And that makes sense for a lot of these teams to decline the NIT, plus the lack of prestige in the tournament overall. You don't have Madison Square Garden as your ultimate goal. Tons of players said they loved being able to just play in Madison Square Garden, so playing in the NIT mattered. So my answer of the question, should teams decline the NIT? I think if you want to get a leg up on the transfer portal, or you do feel that your team's too good to play in the tournament, or you feel the tournament's absolutely worthless, you might as well go ahead and decline the NIT. And I think it's sad because I do like the NIT. I like to see teams that did not get to make the NCAA tournament still get to play for something. And that's the only thing that I disagree with declining the NIT, because some of these seniors on teams like Ole Miss and Memphis and Indiana, they could have played in the NIT and been able to have a chance to win something at the end of their college basketball careers. Plus, even though Madison Square Garden isn't a part of the NIT anymore, and the Final Four of the NIT is being played at various locations these days, the first few rounds of the NIT are still played on home campuses if you are the higher seeds. So some of these teams would still be able to play in front of their fans, and that's tough for the fans as well, because maybe they want to show up, and even though their team struggled, they want to watch their team play a few more games in a season, and that's no longer going to be the case if more of these teams decline, and that's less money that the schools are going to make because that's more tickets that they're not going to be able to sell. So that's a disadvantage of declining the NIT. Plus, I think if more of these big schools decline the NIT in the future, then you're going to have more of the smaller schools make the NIT, which is going to make more of the viewership go down, because teams like Indiana, Ole Miss, and Memphis are going to draw more than a team like San Francisco. Then that's going to hurt the CIT and CBI tournaments that are exclusively made of those really small schools, and maybe those tournaments will go away in the future. So it's all a domino effect. It's kind of like with the realignment going on all around college sports, as more of these schools center themselves around the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, and ACC, it's making other conferences like the American get weaker because they don't have as many good schools in their conferences anymore. So all of this has a domino effect, and I do think that you can look at it both ways, but I do believe overall that the NIT is becoming less and less important. I hate to see it. I like the NIT still, but less teams are wanting to play in it, and it's not just because the NIT is not special anymore, but it's also because teams need to get a jump on the transfer portal. So unless the NCAA moves the transfer portal window, I could see more and more teams declining the NIT in the future, and the tournament's going to become more and more irrelevant. And that also could help the push to expand March Madness as well and make the NCAA tournament bigger, and that would further deaden the NIT, because then every single team that's worth their salt at all is going to be in the NCAA tournament, and I don't think that the tournament should be expanded at all. So all of this has implications and connotations, but I do think at the end of the day, teams like Indiana declining the NIT makes a lot of sense, and things are going to have to change if those teams are going to accept an NIT bid in the future, or they will continue to decline the NIT until the tournament is basically completely irrelevant. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below about my thoughts on the NIT and the tournament landscape as a whole, and how all of these other tournaments are affected by the declining interest to play in the NIT, and whether you are a believer that teams are declining the NIT mostly because the NIT is more irrelevant than it ever has, or if you think it's because of the transfer portal window and other reasons. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description, and I'll see you next time.